Welcome back. And for our next story, I just want to issue an apology right now because our next story that we have, honestly, not many people are going to like to hear what I am about to say and what has been revealed about a movie that right now is highly beloved. In fact, I would even say that it's one of the most highly praised movies of 2023 so far. And even I myself, I love this movie. I put out my review a few weeks ago. I adored it. I consider, already I'm considering it one of the best animated films of the year. But then this story came out and it definitely is a shocker. And I do feel like it's something that I know many of you, even myself, don't want to talk about, but it absolutely needs to talk about. And by the way, I just want to go and state this right now, and I will be repeating this, that I am not taking away the people's love for this movie. I'm not telling you to go and boycott this movie. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't love the movie anymore. If you still love it, go ahead, still love it. But this issue needs to be addressed. This unfortunate reality has to be seen and needs to be talked about for the benefit of the future so that less of this can actually happen. So with that said, let us go and discuss about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Now, so far, like I said before, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is one of the biggest hits of 2023. Even not too long ago, it has officially crossed the $500 million mark in the global box office, and not to mention all the massive praise that it has been getting from critics and audiences. However, a lot has changed when this article from Vulture came in. This article specifically is called Spider-Verse Artists Say Working on the Sequel Was Death by 1,000 Paper Cuts, written by Chris Lee. And to go and quickly summarize what this article is all about is that this article discusses about how there are 4 animators who stepped in and they wish to be anonymous on the factor. But they have actually worked on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and they talked about how much of a nightmare it was when working on the feature, where the production was actually filled with massive chaos. In fact, you probably may have remembered that originally Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was supposed to be released in April of 2022. But then Sony decided to go and delay that to October of 2022, and they stated that it was because of pandemic-related issues for the big delay. But then there was another major delay that happened from October of 2022 to June of 2023. And that's where things start to get a little bit suspicious, like, hold on, what's up, what's going on, because these delays aren't necessarily normal, because now Spider-Verse has been delayed by over a year. And a lot of people have been very accepting. They were like, okay, give them time to make sure that this movie does work. But what they actually don't know is that it's not necessarily pandemic-related issues that cause all the delays. It's because of the nightmarish production that it went, where it was just way too chaotic. And the big reason as to why it was so chaotic is because of the toxic work ethic of 2 of the most highly acclaimed names that are attached to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. In fact, these are the 2 people that are mostly credited for the creation of the Spider-Verse movies: Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Now, I know this may seem like a massive shock, like, what the frick did Phil Lord and Chris Miller do? I mean, they're some of the most celebrated names in animation and in cinema right now. Why would they be considered the villains of this entire scenario? What did they do that caused the production to become toxic? Well, I will tell you why. Now, in this article here, they would describe that when it comes to Phil Lord specifically, he has a very unique way when it comes to developing animated movies. And by the way, I just want to go and make another clarification right now that this mainly highlights the work ethic of Phil Lord and Chris Miller during their movies. Because while it primarily highlights Spider-Verse, apparently this also happened in their other features as well. Like, they did the same thing for the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs films, they did the same thing for the Lego movies, and they did the same thing with Mitchell's vs. the Machines. There is no confirmation if they have also done the same thing on the live action productions that they have directed, written, and produced, or if the same can be said about the TV shows that they have worked on, including the new season of Clone High right now. So this is only primarily focusing on how they would go and handle animated features. Now, with that said, I would like to go and discuss about how animated films are usually made. Now, you probably know that during the pre-production, that is one of the most important components to make sure that they have a proper story and that they know how the movie is going to look like through storyboards and animatics. That is the place where the writers, the editors, and the story artists all collaborate to go and build the foundation of the movie. Not necessarily the whole movie itself, but just the core of it, the foundation, that whatever changes that they would have to go and do, especially in terms of the writing, in terms of the narrative and stuff like that, it would be right there and only there. And for the stuff that they know works, that they know they say, okay, this will be in the movie no matter what, they will go and push that onto the production, where now the team would go and fully animate that and put it onto the final film. And it is important that for that step in particular, to keep it in the storyboards and the animatic stage so that they don't go and fully waste their time and fully waste their resources afterwards. Like that is an important thing to save money onto the budget and to go and save the well-being of the animators so that they don't overwork for nothing, you know? Like, they would go and end up working on a scene and then suddenly, oh, well, that scene is no longer needed, you know? They don't have to go and do that, you know? That's why you would have the storyboards and the animatic, because it's right then and there where you do have an idea of, like, the story and the cinematography without too much of a consequence if you would go and do the change. This is not how Phil Lord works. For some reason, animatics and storyboards is completely foreign to him. He doesn't see how the movie is going to be. So what he does is that he demands that no matter what they have written, no matter what is storyboarded, that they would go and fully animate, that they would go and fully develop on that. And let me tell you exactly the biggest consequence of Phil Lord's actions onto it. There's actually one section that actually highlighted that very well in this article. Let me go and try to find that. Yeah, it's right over here. So let me just read you from my source on Variety. It states that for animated movies, the majority of the trial and error process happens during the writing and storyboarding, not with fully completed animation. Phil's mentality was, this change makes for a better movie, so why aren't we doing it? It's obviously been very expensive having to redo the same shot several times over and have every department touch it so many times. The changes in the writing would go through storyboarding, then it gets to layout, the animation, then final layout, which is adjusting cameras and placement of things in the environment. Then there's cloth and hair effects, which have to repeatedly be redone anytime there's an animation change. The effects department also passes over the characters with ink lines and does all the crazy stuff like explosions, smoke, and water. And they work closely with lighting and compositing on all the colors and visual treatments in this movie. Every pass is plugged into editing. Smaller changes tend to start with animation, and big story changes can involve more departments like visual development, modeling, rigging, and texture painting. There are a lot of artists affected by one change. Imagine an endless stream of them. And this is something that Phil Lord would keep on making their animators do again and again and again, where they would go and fully develop a movie, where they would fully develop a scene, where they would show you, where they would go and fully work everything. And then suddenly at that point, that's when Phil would watch the movie and would be like, nah, I don't like that. Let's go and scrap that all together. The amount of hours, the amount of days that have been worked on one particular scene is suddenly just entirely gone, entirely destroyed, just thrown out to the garbage, just like that. And it's because of that kind of mentality and that kind of work ethic, it pretty much led to a chain of events where the animators had no choice but to really overwork themselves, where the average time to work on Spider-Verse is actually 11 hours a day, about for 7 days a week, and on average, like weekly, they would be working 70 hours, which is absolutely ridiculous. And on top of that, if they would legitimately get paid overtime, that's debatable. But overtime, it's been a repeated thing that has been going on. And on top of that, with the amount of revisions that Phil Lord would constantly go in demand, there was actually at one point that he would delay the entire production. And that's also another major problem with Phil Lord, is just the fact that he cannot stick with one idea. His mind would just continuously go all over the place, where whatever idea he would have last month, then this month he would go and completely change that altogether. And there was at one point in 2021 where there was one serious delay because Phil Lord wanted to really change some things in terms of the flow of the movie, in terms of the story of Spider-Verse, that there was legit 3 to 6 months that the animators could do nothing. Like, they were just sitting there idle, and Sony Pictures was legitimately paying animators at Sony Animation or at Sony Imageworks to literally do nothing. They just sit there, can't do much because Phil Lord has to go and try to change up some stuff in the story, which of course Phil Lord did get in some serious trouble with Sony Pictures and did cause some fights. So that's honestly the massive, ridiculous thing that has been going on with Phil Lord, and the kind of toxic environment that he really did develop. And by the way, I forgot to go and mention that with that massive delay, it really did worry the animators, because eventually, like, they would end up really falling behind in their schedule. And the only way they could go and catch up is to really overwork themselves, where unfortunately burnouts have become extremely common, and there are plenty of people who could not take the heat of that of the production. In fact, even though Across the Spider-Verse really took pride in the fact that around 1,000 animators, or over 1,000 animators, worked on this feature film, 100 animators and 100 artists have actually stated that they quit. They had to bail out from it because they really could not handle the pressure. And I will go into later as to those who have stayed, and for the very unfortunate reasons as to why. But yeah, like, things could get so intense that there have been like tons of people in the 3-digit marks to which they had to bail out. They had to full on quit altogether. Now, and I just want to quickly mention, yes, in this article, they did state that the same can be said onto some of the other productions that they have done. Like, it's, again, not just with the Spider-Verse movies, but it happened in Mitchell's, it happened with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and it happened in the Lego movie. In fact, in here, they actually stated, in regards to the Lego movie, where apparently they were about 80% complete, and then suddenly, it's actually right here, to which they state, Phil and Chris have a reputation. As producers, they used to come onto a project where it was 80% finished. Once they could ingest the movie properly and see what it's going to be like, they would come through with the guillotine and start enthusiastically editing. They'd come in and start rewrite lines, throw out entire sequences, throw out animations all over the place, everywhere. And this is animation that people have been working on for a long time. Finished work, not some mock-up thing. I heard on Mitchell's they did that, on Spider-Verse 1 they did that, Lego the same thing. Now, you might be wondering though, even though that's what Phil Lord has done, what about his buddy Chris Miller? Would the same thing be said to him? Honestly, no. In fact, they barely had anything to say about Chris Miller, because of the fact that he barely was there in the first place. And that was the biggest criticism that they would go and give to Chris Miller specifically, is that throughout the grand majority of the production, he was missing in action. He was just not there. It was just Phil Lord who had the power to go and like really screw things up with the entire production. And his friend was somehow just almost non-existent. Now, I am not going to say that Chris Miller did absolutely nothing in the production. That is a flat out lie. But yeah, his contribution was pretty minimal. In fact, they actually stated that when it comes to Across the Spider-Verse, he only really showed up as a producer in the last 2 months of production, which was April and May. And by the way, yes, they really finished Across the Spider-Verse at the very last minute. The same can be said with Spider-Verse 1, by the way. And with Chris Miller, it was only in the last 2 months that he stepped in and demanded some changes. Like, okay, Chris demanded you to go and do this. Chris demanded you to go and do that. You know, like those kinds of things. And by the way, I would like to go and address, because I know some people might bring this up, what about the directors? Like, the thing with the Spider-Verse movies is that both of them so far have 3 directors involved. Like, don't they have a massive say about it? Well, unfortunately, that's where things really do get complicated, and that is where their role, like Phil Lord and Chris Miller's roles, yeah, they can be pretty dangerous, because the thing is, sure, the directors can have, you know, like they can have like a massive say of how things are going to go with certain scenes. But when it comes to what Phil Lord and Chris Miller would do, keep in mind, they're not just the producers, but they're also the writers. And the thing is, with their producer credit, they have the power to veto whatever change would occur. Like, Ken Powers would look at a scene that was fully animated and say, yeah, that scene's great, let's go and keep that. But then Phil Lord would step in and say, no, I got a new idea for a scene, go get rid of that entirely and try to make something new with it. And that's pretty much the current situation that has been addressed in this entire article, or at least this is just the footnotes of it. I highly recommend that you go and read this article right over here. Very fascinating. And by the way, I know it's going to be a very tough read, but it is one of those that it's kind of like you need to read it more so than you want to read it, because it does reflect a very dark truth in regards to the production of a highly beloved feature like Across the Spider-Verse, and it reveals how it is to go and work with Phil Lord and Chris Miller. To which, as it turns out, like, yes, I know there are many people who do love their movies, but at the same time, animators absolutely hate Phil Lord and Chris Miller as bosses. I don't know if there are many people in the animation industry who would really want to work with Phil Lord and Chris Miller. So, and in fact, there are actually plenty of animators in the industry right now who made a vow that they never want to work with Phil Lord and Chris Miller again. They don't want to go into that massive hell that they went and endured. And I can understand if this is something that's just massively heartbreaking to go and read, because I know with Phil Lord and Chris Miller, they have been very admired, that they, you know, they're like the new hot shots, the new innovators of the animation industry. And the thing with Lord and Miller is that what they are known for the most is breaking the rules of what people would think an animated feature would be, or specifically with a computer animated feature. And that's what they have been highly praised with movies like the Lego Movie, or the things they have produced with the Mitchells and Spider-Verse. It's the fact that they would go and break the rules and really take the medium to a whole new level by doing things that have never been thought of before. Yeah! And I already hear some of the praises with that little subscription. Thank you, thank you, DJ. But at the same time, however, there is also a massive problem that comes with breaking the rules, because there's another side of Phil Lord and Chris Miller where they would go and break the rules the same way that the CEO of OceanGate broke the rules with his submarine that would go and like let billionaires see the Titanic, or well, the most that they could before, you know, the thing is that at the same time as Phil Lord and Chris Miller would break the rules of animation, they would also break those kinds of rules that are meant to be there for the well-being and the safety of the animators. That it really felt like their heads are way too much onto the movie itself to go and create a massive story that they know that people would really get engaged, that they're just completely blinded by how things are going with their actual animators. They're blinded by how the well-being, the mental health of the people who are actually working for them, who are actually making the feature film. And the thing is, again, I'm not taking away their talent, because I know that Phil Lord and Chris Miller are extremely talented filmmakers, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is definite proof of that. But it's so amazing that you can have people who can be so talented, yet so incompetent at the same time, that they don't know how to make an animated feature without full-on exploiting their animators, really, really taking advantage of them to the point where, like, they would have to suffer for their art. And even though there have been like over 100 animators and artists who quit the production because they couldn't handle how Phil Lord and Chris Miller would run things, there are those who had to go and stay, that they don't really have much of a choice. Because the sad thing is, if you would go and quit a production, there's a very good chance that you're not really going to get rewarded in the long run. Because let's say there was one animator who quit mid-production in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. If their work that they have done was full-on rejected, if it was not there, then they don't get credit. They don't have anything for their animation reel. They don't have anything for their demo, for their portfolio to show off and to present for their next work. It doesn't matter if they were involved with the production or that they did legitimately work at Sony Pictures Animation for it. If if their contribution did not make it at the end, if it didn't make it at the end of the production, if it didn't make it in the final film, then they don't get the credits. They don't get anything in return. Yeah, they'll get the payment during, but in the long run, they have nothing. They don't have the proof to say that they worked on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. But the worst thing is that there are those who don't have a choice financially. And that is because there are a lot of people who worked on Spider-Verse that they are immigrants. And this is honestly one of the saddest things about what happened here. And this is actually highlighted in the final paragraph of the Vulture article, to which it states here, artists in this industry are generally very self-critical. They internalize feedback and want to do their best. If they love a project, they will put the extra hours for free because they want to prove themselves and they want their work to be good. Their work is how they get the next job. A movie like this is taking advantage of those people creatively. But workers are also vulnerable in another sense. They want to stay in Canada. They're on visas from countries from which they'd ideally like to emigrate. Aspirations to immigrate keep them tied to the studio. They're underpaid, so they need the OT to pay the bills, or the overtime to pay their bills. The relocation package doesn't cover costs. So you can only make a production like this when the people doing it feel as though they have no other choice in what they need to do for their financial security. That's no way to live your life. And that's kind of the saddest thing about all this. And I know this might be like a shocking accusation, but the truth is, when it comes to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and possibly with their other films as well, like Mitchell's, Cloudy, and Lego, Phil Lord and Chris Miller are exploiting immigrants. They're legit exploiting artists and immigrants for them to produce their features because of the absolute convoluted way they would go and be filmmaking this. It's honestly, again, it's absolutely ridiculous the way that they would go and work things out. And you might be wondering, by the way, how is it that the higher ups at Sony Pictures would even allow this to go and happen? Why would they be okay? Like, isn't there actual unions that would that would be in place and have regulations to prevent that to go and happen? Well, honestly, I'm just going to go and reset the ad timer right now. I'm just going to go and give a bit of a break. But when we do come back, I will go and explain the problem with Sony Pictures Animation and Sony Pictures and how they are complicit in the exploitation of their own animators. So we are back. And as I was saying, yes, Sony Pictures is definitely complicit in this entire situation. And I just want to say right now that one problem that I have with Sony Pictures Animation that honestly really irks me is the way that they are very scummy in terms of unions. Now, I know that there are many studios. In fact, most major studios are very much scumbags when it comes to unions, and they have a clear hatred for them because, well, there is a set of rules that they have no choice but to pay more money for their artists. And like there are some companies out there that are a lot more straightforward about it. Like I think it's safe to say Disney is pretty anti-union, and yeah, it often shows. But the thing that makes it very scummy with Sony Pictures in particular is that technically, yes, Sony Pictures Animation is a unionized studio. Like, they have collaborated with the Animators Guild, and I do believe they are currently in discussions for a new deal with the Animators Guild. But here's the major catch, though. Sony Pictures Animation in Culver City, that is only the pre-production place. They only make the core aspect, the foundation of the animated films. Most of the people who would make Sony Pictures Animation movies are not at Sony Pictures Animation. Like, it's mainly just the pre-production place that they would go and develop there. Now, the actual place where most of the people who do work on those movies are actually in Sony Pictures Imageworks in Vancouver, BC. And that place is not unionized. And that's the thing that really feels very scummy because, yeah, they'll put on this fake mask to say that they are pro-union, but in actuality, they found ways to go and like slither around unions to go and underpay their animators. And the sad thing about it is that considering that we are talking about Sony Pictures, this is not the first time that we have heard about the situation in a Sony Pictures production. You probably remember the controversy related to Sausage Party back in 2016, where it's a little bit of a similar story, where in this case, instead of Phil Lord, we got Greg Tiernan, who really exploited the crap out of the animators because they were non-union and they were forced to go and work overtime, to work ridiculous hours, and to really make them feel burned out and very demotivated about the entire experience. So again, this is not the first time that it happened in a Sony production, and a big part of it is because of the fact that they purposely go and let most of the animation, or let most of the people who would work on their movies, to be in a non-union environment, like in Vancouver, BC, in Sony Pictures Imageworks. And I just want to state right now, it's only recently that they do start to go and actually unionized studios. There are only a handful that have begun to be unionized in Canada, and I think a few places in Vancouver, BC, but the point is, Canada is still very non-union when it comes to productions and animation, which is a shame because Canada, and in major metropolises, including Vancouver and in Montreal, they really are growing in terms of the business. In fact, not too long ago, a few weeks actually, it was announced that Sony Pictures is opening a brand new Sony Pictures Imageworks in Montreal. And the chances of that being unionized, I don't know. But if they're just, I don't know, if this is a tactic that that they're doing to try to avoid unions, then honestly, I don't know if I want to welcome it in Montreal. But the point is that This entire situation, the reason why all this even happened in the first place is because of the fact that there are no unions that would put in rules and laws to go and protect the well-being of animators, to make sure that they are well paid, to make sure that they are not overworked. And I can guarantee you right now, I don't think you will ever see Phil Lord and Chris Miller work in an animation studio that is fully unionized. Like, you're never going to see them work in a place like DreamWorks Animation or Disney Animation or even Illumination Entertainment, because those studios have fully unionized artists, and they have their own set of rules to protect their rights. And the way that Phil Lord and Chris Miller would go and make their movies, they need to sacrifice some of those rights. Again, they're known to break the rules, and they want to break union rules in order to make their movies, because they're so freaking focused on trying to develop the whole thing all together just to go and like scrap that and try to redo it again. In fact, it even stated in this article that it has happened, in fact, most of the time, where animators would have to go and redo shots 5 times. And that's almost every single shot that you would see in the film. Imagine being fully redone, like fully reanimated 5 times, just for Phil Lord to say, nah, I don't like it that way. In fact, I did a little change in the story. Can you go and make an update so that you can include that too? Like, imagine how frustrating that can be. It's honestly such a ridiculous thing. And honestly, it makes me question Phil Lord and Chris Miller's image, because they present, like, when you look at them online and when you see them in interviews and stuff like that, they present themselves as very empathetic. They present themselves as very democratic, as very pro-union, and always looking out for artists and animators and all that kind of stuff. Like, they want to present themselves that they are a part, like they are very for the people, that they are a part of the people, and that, they feel the pain of others. But honestly, after hearing this story, it's either that they are so oblivious of their own production, like they are so oblivious of their own work ethic and their own work environment, that they have no idea that they are going completely against their own values. That, or they're just doing it on purpose for the sake of virtue signaling, that they're kind of lying just to give themselves a positive image. Now, I'm not saying that is the case, but it's like really either or. It's just like the way they present themselves on social media and what's been revealed on this Vulture article, it really does highlight 2 completely different Phil Lords and Chris Millers. And that's honestly that really is kind of a major situation that eventually they need to go and address. And funny enough, though, I will state that there are a couple of people in this article that actually went into the defense of Phil Lord and Chris Miller and Sony Pictures. But funny enough, they didn't really do a good job. And that is specifically coming from 2 people, Michelle Grady, who is the executive vice president and general manager of Sony Pictures Imageworks, and one of the producers of Spider-Verse, Amy Pascal. And in this article, they would do their best to try to contradict what the other animators have stated about what happened during production, saying that no, everything is fine. They don't represent what most artists think about Spider-Verse and all that kind of stuff. No, everything is fine. No, Phil Lord is a great guy. He knows what he's doing and all that kind of crap. But the worst part is that when they are confronted about many of the problems that happened during production, I think this is honestly the worst response that you could find in this entire situation, is actually right over here. And this is from Amy Pascal, by the way. To the workers who felt demoralized by having revised final renders 5 times in a row, the Spider-Verse producer, Amy Pascal, said, I guess, welcome to making movies. Like, how much of a dead weight response is that? That's like literally saying, that really is the response of like, I got nothing to say about it. I got nothing to defend about it. Oh, well, boys will be boys, I guess. Like, oh my God. And you can keep in mind, this is Amy Pascal. This is someone who has never legitimately worked in animated features. Like, very rarely would she ever actually be in the shoes of the production crew actually making movies. Like, this is a woman that is just way too high in her own privileges. And she's just saying, oh, well, it is what it is. Like, she literally has no defense. And throughout this article, both Michelle Grady and Amy Pascal, they don't do that great of a job to go and defend their take or defend Phil Lord and Chris Miller about their mishandling of the production. It's honestly ridiculous. But the worst thing I will say, and this is probably the saddest part of all this, is that despite of what it has all been revealed, despite the fact that Phil Lord and Chris Miller still have no idea how to properly produce an animated feature. Despite everything about this, I highly doubt that much is really going to change. I don't know if we are going to see any improvements that would come because of that would come out of all this, or I don't know if we will see actual consequences, mainly because of the fact that Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has been very successful. I mean, in the mind of Sony Pictures, I mean, we know for a fact they don't care about the well-being of artists and animators. They would go and look at the results of Spider-Verse with how highly praised it has been and with how much money it's doing. They're pretty much in the mindset of, well, if it ain't broken, then why fix it? You know, they're just gonna they will be in the defense of Lord and Miller because they have still been proven to be profitable, and because of that, they're not gonna go and immediately change the habits of how Lord and Miller would go and make their movies, in the fear that it would break the flow of how things are currently going with the Spider-Verse movies and with their brand as well. So honestly, I would love to see that that both Lord and Miller would be held accountable by this, but I don't know if the higher ups would really go and do so. And by the way, I just want to go and address this right now. I'm not doing this to go and slam Phil Lord and Chris Miller. I'm not doing I'm not going back into the whole hating Sony phase and take down Lord and Miller because they suck and all that kind of stupid crap. No, I want them to improve. I want them to do better. And I mean, I do acknowledge that they can be very talented. I've already said this before, but this needs to be addressed, that this is not okay. I mean, you could still love Spider-Verse. That's perfectly fine. But I'm asking to go and separate the art from the artist. I don't care how good Spider-Verse is. This type of working condition is never okay. And honestly, Lord and Miller needs to be held accountable. They need to be called out on this to say that, hey, what you're doing is wrong. What you are doing, again, is exploiting animators and immigrants for your art. Either wake up to reality and realize how they are feeling during this whole production, or honestly get the hell out, because honestly, or just stop playing around, stop pretending that you care about unions and all that kind of stuff, because clearly you guys care more about yourselves and your reputation more so than the people who are actually working on your feature films. It's honestly ridiculous. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be called out. And I mean, I'm just saying right now, I know I'm probably going to get backlash. I'm probably going to get so much hate from Phil Lord and Chris Miller fans, and they're going to dogpile on me and bring back like the stupid crap that I used to say about Sony Animation and all that kind of stuff. But I still feel like this needs to be addressed. This needs to be called out. That how they would go and make animated movies is extremely incompetent, and it hurts animators more so than it would legitimately help them. Like, the fact that they would work on Spider-Verse 2, like, is that really worth sacrificing some of their own well-being? No. Like, I understand, like, the whole meaning about, oh, like, you got to suffer from your art, but no, this is not the case. You know, especially when, like, this is just, especially when this is just Lord and Miller, who has this extremely convoluted and very broken down way where they're just taking advantage of animators who are not unionized. And also, I just want to say that there is a part of me that felt like I kind of knew that something like this was happening, especially when they mention about the budget. Like, you probably have heard before that the budget for Across the Spider-Verse was around $100 million. This article actually stated that it's actually $150 million, but back then it was said to be like $100 million. And I remember people were celebrating Spider-Verse and slamming on Elemental because that film had double the budget of $200 million. And they were saying like, yo, see, man, see, that's how you do it. And Spider-Verse did it half the cost. Elemental, on the other hand, they're just wasting money for nothing and all that kind of stuff. But then again, there was a part of me that always felt like, hold on a sec, there's something that's not right about all this. Because, okay, you have a budget of like 100 million or 150 million, and yet they would also take pride in the fact that they would say that over 1,000 animators worked on this movie. How much did these animators get paid? How much, like, how, you know, like, in terms of how much that they have actually worked, how much money did they receive for the work that they have done in Spider-Verse? I'm just saying, because if they have a lower budget and worked so many hours, it's probably not that much, or at the very least, not that much compared to those working on Elemental. I'm just saying, there's like, that for me was kind of the first sign that there was something not right going on with the production of Across the Spider-Verse. And not to mention that it kind of reminds me back, like, when, like, another thing that people would used to bash Disney for, like, another thing that it reminds me of, I remember back, like, in 2020, when on Disney Plus, Disney would go and put out the documentary series Into the Unknown, which explains the making of Frozen 2. And there are some people, they would go and, like, they would already hate Frozen 2, and they would slam the documentary saying that the production was apparently such a mess. That would explain why Frozen 2 didn't come out great, because the filmmakers didn't really know what they were doing, and all that, and all those kinds of comments. Well, if that is the case, I mean, looking into what they would do with Frozen 2, yeah, like, it was a bit of a messy production. But the thing is, the people at Disney making Frozen 2, they knew what they were doing when compared to Spider-Verse. The way that Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee, the way that they handled the production of Frozen 2, it's way better than how Phil Lord and Chris Miller handled their movies with Spider-Verse, Cloudy, Mitchells, and Lego. There is kind of this massive hypocrisy. Like, if a bad production explains a bad movie, how do you explain this? It's honestly ridiculous. It really is. And all this needs to be called out. And overall, again, I just want to say that if you guys still love Spider-Verse, then it's perfectly fine. I mean, I still love Spider-Verse. It's still, like, possibly my favorite movie from Sony Animation. You know, I'm not taking that away from you. I'm not saying to go and boycott the movie. I'm not saying you should go against the movie. But what I am saying is that no matter how great the product itself is, that doesn't mean that it makes it okay for the poor treatment that they would give to the people who would go and create the movie. They still need to be held accountable. They still need to be called out on this, because I can guarantee you it results in a massive double standard that anyone else who would go and if anyone else would do the same thing that Lord and Miller would do in Across the Spider-Verse, I can guarantee you that they would be blacklisted because of the way that they would completely waste money, they would waste time, and they would waste resources. And in the case of Phil Lord and Chris Miller, I can see now that, honestly, their reputation feels like they're on thin ice. They're not fully canceled. Their careers aren't over because of this, but they really are on thin ice right now, especially if it's true that Phil Lord would continuously clash with Sony Pictures. And from there, and the reason why I say this is because, yeah, their movies are profitable now. But if it does happen that in the future, suddenly they would start losing money on their movies, and it has happened before, especially when it comes to the Lego Movie 2, the second part, then they would have no one to blame but themselves. It would be their fault that their filmmaking process would turn out to be such a disaster that really it's like it's just their tactic and how much that they have completely wasted, that it's their fault that the studio lost money. And from there, they may end up never working again. Maybe not entirely, but yeah, their reputation would go in an all-time low if their animated features would prove to no longer be that much profitable. So yeah, honestly, and there is actually one more thing that I do want to go and address, and that is actually regarding what's going to happen to Beyond the Spider-Verse, because that's still going to be coming up. And for now, it is still scheduled for the end of March of next year. How are things going with that production? Well, according to this, it's not going pretty well. There was one comment. Someone talked about how things are currently going on with Beyond the Spider-Verse, and it's actually right over here, to which they said, they announced that Beyond the Spider-Verse will be released in March of next year. I've seen people say, oh, they probably worked on it at the same time. There is no way that movie is coming out then. There's been progress on the pre-production side of things, but as far as the production side goes, the only progress that has been made on the third one is any exploration or tests that were done before the movie was split into 2 parts. Everyone's been fully focused on Across the Spider-Verse and barely crossing the finish line. And now it's like, oh yeah, now we have to do the other one. And I mean, at this current point, with the fact that right now, like there's still the strike and stuff like that, like I know I stated previously that I thought, yeah, it's most likely going to be delayed because there's that writer strike going on and a possible actor strike. But no, in this case, it's for sure that it's not going to be released in March. In fact, it's doubtful if it's even going to be released in 2024 because of the messy production that it has been. And most likely, Sony Pictures is going to continue to enable Lord and Miller's toxic work environment to the point that we're just going to go into this endless cycle again of like the toxic work ethic of continuously wasting resources, wasting animators' time, and really taking damage to their mental health just to go and produce this third movie. So I'm just saying right now, with what's been revealed and the way that Lord and Miller would go and work on these movies, it's pretty much very likely that we're going to end up seeing a 2025 release on Beyond the Spider-Verse, that people will have to be a bit more patient with what's been going on. So yeah, honestly, this is just my massive discussion about this whole thing. And again, chances are I may get backlash for this. I may get massive hate for it. But you know what? I still stand with what I say. I still stand that Phil Lord and Chris Miller have been revealed to be very talented, yet incredibly idiotic and incompetent filmmakers to which they don't know how to produce an animated feature or how to even make an animated film in the first place without exploiting their artists and immigrants. So I'm still standing to my position on that. So with that said, I would like to go into the chat wall, and I know I've talked more than enough on this, but now I want to know from you. What are your thoughts on this whole story? Let's see now. It always feels that no matter what, many filmmakers will never respect nor care about animators who has to go through hell and back just to get enough money to live. It won't probably be long until we see animators unite with the writers and go on strike. And what's sad about this is that before this story goes out, Marvel was critiqued for using AI for the intro of Secret Invasion, and people were pointing at Spider-Verse as something that respects the artist. Yeah, and I mean, I'll just say now, I know that it's not exclusively a Sony thing. It's not exclusively a Phil Lord and Phil Lord and Chris Miller thing. Like, many people are guilty of this. But this especially needs to be pointed out, especially when it feels like many people might let Lord and Miller get away with it just because of, oh, look how good this product turned out to be. Let's see now. All I have to say is just shameful, especially to the directors. You mean the producers. But anyways, I mean, talk about rushing to the final product. Like, if I would do something like that, it would be because of anxiety reasons. But for them, they really don't even sound like they have the patience. Just head first into the final product before even testing works. Not one have the final say on the just do it attitude, only to be thrown out afterwards. Just shameful. It's no wonder they were kicked out of the Han Solo movie. Yeah, and that's kind of the crazy thing, is that all this really makes Lucasfilm very justifiable into what they have done. Like, honestly, I completely get why Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilms entirely had to kick out Lord and Miller from the Han Solo project, because the way that they would break the rules of filmmaking like this, it's completely reckless, and it's also very destructive. So they wouldn't want, so honestly, yeah, maybe they're in the right. Maybe they did what's for the best for the Han Solo movie, or maybe it's not for the best for the Han Solo movie because it turned out to be a massive flop, but it is for the best for the people working at Lucasfilm, so that they don't have to face the wrath of Lord and Miller's incompetence. Let's see. As much as I adore Across the Spider-Verse, happy to reclaim #1 at the box office, and still listening to their new soundtrack to this day, this news saddens me. It reminds me of the Toy Story 2 scenario of artists trying to make things perfect, but being overworked because of the executives' demands. If I were them, delay the third film so it wouldn't come out as mid, and give artists a break. As a Spider-Verse fan, all studios like Sony and even Marvel Studios need to treat artists with respect. I understand how you feel, man. As much as I love it Across the Spider-Verse, this does prove the old saying of old habits die hard. The way these animators were treated is pretty sickening, and the proof that practices like Phil Lord's should be discouraged in the industry. And with those statements regarding Beyond the Spider-Verse, yeah, I wouldn't mind if it got pushed back to 2025. Hell, delay it to 2030. I don't care. Give them enough time to finish the movie. Or honestly, honestly, more so than like a schedule, I want to see someone put Phil Lord and Chris Miller on a leash. Like, honestly, make them change, make them change their attitude, discourage their practices, tell Chris Miller to actually be more involved with the production, and tell Phil Lord to stop wasting resources. Tell him to go and, like, whatever you write, stick with it. Don't change your mind at the last freaking second. Seriously, that would be something more important than the delays. Anyways, I hate to say it, but I do think the Sony executives and also Phil Lord didn't learn their lesson from years ago when they handled their artists at Sony Animation, which sucks really, because I thought the animators did a great job with their work. I was suspicious on why it's a bigger budget, the long running time, and the amount of people working on this. It sucks that the animators deal with this mess of a production, and as an animator myself, animators deserve better. Then there's a side note, but it got cut out. Anyways, I don't have a lot of time left, so just a couple more to read. Suddenly, I'm glad Ron Howard directed Solo. The Sony Spider-Man trilogy curse strikes again. Guess Sony let another sausage party disaster happen. If this is what it takes to stylize animation, I shudder to imagine the horror stories that would come out of TMNT Mutant Mayhem. I'm so glad I decided to watch Elemental 3 times instead of seeing Across the Spider-Verse even once. I also must question Lord and Miller's actual involvement with the Clone High and Jump Street movies. Did they even create Joan of Arc? That I feel like is a whole other story there. All right, I'm just going to go and read one more comment before we move on to the next story. All right, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring regarding this news. First of all, unionize Canadian visual effects studios ASAP. And second, I think there is a lesson to be learned regarding auteurism and hero worship. In the words of Everything Everywhere All at Once director Daniel Kwan, genius does not stem from individuals like us, but rather genius emerged from the collective. We need to start taking the quote into full effect moving onward.